Hi, everybody. This is the first time I've recorded a narration on one of my videos, so I hope it's going to go okay. First off, somebody asked me about painting the file folder. So what I'm doing now and in this photo is I'm supporting the spine of the file folder. There's a whole tutorial on making this cover, and I believe it was Leslie asked me about how I painted my cover. What I'm doing there is I'm just adding a little piece of cardboard, tag board. It's actually a piece of cereal box. I use Mod Podge with just a little tiny bit of water added to it to thin it down. I find it's a little too thick right out of the jar. Then I covered up that spine with a piece of Tevic, and that's all in the cover video, which I will link down below. What I really wanted to show you was how to paint the spine, or how to paint the cover, and here I'm just making sure that the spine reinforcement, the Tevic and everything is down real well. Now, in a minute, I'm gonna go on. I'm just covering the spine up there with some Mod Podge. I'm going to go on and show you how I paint the cover. This video is going to be a little choppy, and that's why I decided to try to record it as a narration instead of doing it live or doing it as I went. I'm going to use, I use mostly craft paint when I do this. This is Deco Art Americana. This one happens to be bluegrass green, and I just want to get some paint on the cover. Now I paint both sides of my cover exactly the same. I usually paint the inside first, but the spine was wet, so I just painted the outside of this cover. Here I'm just getting some paint on the file folder. The idea is not to have it necessarily perfectly smooth or exactly all one smooth color. I just wanted a base layer of the paint. And as you'll see in just a little bit, as I worked through this, I worked through with sort of a palette of turquoises, then added a little purple into it. I always put black and white in my pieces for some reason. It's just one of those things I do. So we'll see that down the road. Right now, it's just a matter of getting it on there. And if you didn't notice, I use the same brush all the time. I use one until it dies. I'm very bad about taking care of my paintbrushes. I don't buy real expensive ones. Because I have a bad habit of leaving them sitting in water. I know that's not good for them, but that's what I do. So, we've about got this cover painted. I'm just finishing up the edges. Yeah, didn't have quite enough paint. One of the reasons this video is going to be kind of choppy is I do not like to use a heat tool to dry things. So, and I let my layers dry in between. Craft paint dries pretty fast. And if I'm working by myself and I'm not doing a video, I just switch projects and I keep a couple of projects going, because then the next piece is usually dry by the time I get back to it. So if I just work on one and then work on the other, I can get back to it. So that's all done, and now we need to let it dry. I'll be back in a minute. And here I am with a nice dry file folder covered with that bluegrass green. And now I am going to take another color, and this again is Deco Art Americana. It's probably whichever store I was in. But this is a color called Sweet Mint. And it's kind of a blue-green minty color. And I've got some out on my palette off to the right of the video. And I am just making some circles. I'm not worried about whether or not they're solid, whether or not they're perfectly round. Nothing about that makes a big deal to me. I just am just getting a layer of big fluffy dots on there. If you notice though that at least a couple of them are off the edge so that the design runs off the edge of the file folder or off the edge of my piece of artwork. I like things that make it flow in and out, so I tend to make things go off the edge. Must have decided that spot needed one. It was just a little too open. Okay. And we're going to be letting that dry, and I'll be back in just a minute or so with the next step. Oh, one of the things I tend to do is if I have paint left over on my palette, I have a book on my desk I just keep, and there you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the video that I'm just using up my paint. Now I might go back and work in that and make an actual art journal page or something, but right now I'm just using the paint up. And it's time to let the dots dry. And we're back with dry dots on the second layer. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use some punchinella. And punchinella is, if I said that right, it's the leftover, it looks like a ribbon. It's a leftover ribbon that they have cut sequins out of. And I use this piece over and over and over again. I'm using a little makeup sponge and some black. This happens to be apple barrel, and it was a glossy color. It's just whatever black I had. I do decide later on that the black's a little strong, so I'll cover it up a little bit more than I might have had I not overdone the black maybe. You notice that's a makeup sponge I'm using. I've got paint out on my palette, and I just try to not pick up too much paint at one time because you will get gloppies. If I get gloppies, I don't worry about it. I just keep on going. I do try to turn the strip of punchinella in different directions. It has sort of a linear, the holes are sort of linear. And so by turning it in different directions on my project, it doesn't look like they were all just laid on there in a row. And especially with the black, you need to make sure it's good and dry. And with putting on anything through a stencil, if you get a little bit of thickness, you need to make sure that you let it get dry before you go on to the next thing, because it'll get picked up on the back of your stencil and moved around. Almost done with this part. And now we need to let it dry. Okay, we're going to add some spirals. That is a piece of packaging plastic that I used the die cut machine and a die that I have that's in 3 spirals. And I am using another deco art paint called Spa Blue. It's a real pale blue turquoise. And another makeup sponge, and I'm just laying the paint down. Now, I did find that this stencil, the spiral tends to pick up. So if you look carefully, you'll notice that the spiral's not real smooth and clean. I also can sometimes pick up too much paint. With the sponge and the stencil, you want to have sort of a dry sponge. And again, I try to work where I work some of the designs off the edge, and I turn my stencil around so that all of the spirals aren't going the same way. Well, they all sort of go the same way, but they aren't all the big one on top, etc. So we'll tell you, if you like my videos, to please subscribe to my channel. It's been growing nicely, and it's making me real excited to know that people are enjoying my videos. Make sure you comment and let me know you were here to watch one. Ask me questions. I try to get on at least once a day. I don't always. As just with everybody else, we have lots going on in our lives, so I don't always get on the computer every day. And for some reason, I find it hard to post comments to YouTube on my phone. It doesn't seem to let me where I want to be. I'm getting there. I think this step took the longest of any of the steps. I also think I ran out of paint a couple times. I can't remember. All through this particular step, I kept thinking that the black was too heavy. I had really sort of intended this to be the second to the last coat of paint or step of paint, color wise, and the more I looked at it, the more I was sure that I had overdone the black, or that the black was just too heavy for the other colors that I had in there. So that right there, you can especially see how the stencil, the center of that large spiral was picking up. Almost there. Just needed to do the bottom little edges and then let it dry. Of course, by the time I got to the bottom, the top was probably close to being dry. Oh, I had paint left. And there again, if I have paint left, I make sure to, oh, and I was rubbing the paint off the stencil. There wasn't much on it, but there might have been a little bit, so. Okay, this is where I realized I had not shown you or told you what paints I was using. Anyways, I've told you what the colors are now. The darker one was that bluegrass, and as we went along. Now, to counteract the fact that I had overdone the black or that the black was too strong for the other colors that I used, I decided to put some white into the mix of the thing. And I just went back in with a punchinella and did it with white. Looks like I've got paint on my fingers too. Okay. I'm sorry about the framing. Apparently there was a little bit off of the file folder, is a little bit bigger than the frame. And there again, I did end up with too much paint, so I just used it in my little wipe-off book. It's just a composition book on my desk that on my work table so that I have something to work into when I've got extra paint. I just hunt up a page that looks good and paint something on it. Okay, so this layer is, I used a purple, and this purple is called Purple Pizzazz. It's another Americana Deco Art paint. And the reason for the purple is when you have a color family that's related so closely together like the turquoises are, nothing pops. And so you need something that's a little bit of contrast so that you get this pop of color. And what I've done is I've put out a squash of paint on my palette, and that plastic thing you see me making circles with is a lid off of laundry soap. And I just dip my lid, the circled edges of the lid, and into the paint, and then use it like a stamp. And there, if a minute ago you saw me go off the edge. Now you can also twist it a little bit every once in a while if I don't have quite enough paint, but you will get a thick, thin kind of area of paint with this. So you want to do a couple of things, and that is, one, make sure that you get it good and dry before you go on to the next step. And two, don't touch things because it will slosh it'll get messy. And you use a little bit more paint than you think because it does have that thick rig. The texture, the surface of this file folder now has sort of a raised area where those circles are. And that's fine by me. There again, you see that I go off the edge. The whole time I'm painting this, I am painting both sides. I just didn't want you to have to watch me paint both sides of this file folder exactly the same. You have to make sure it gets dry, and for what I'm going to use it for, to make a cover for a journal, I want the inside to be as pretty as the outside. Okay, we're almost ready for the last step. Once the little ring's dried, I want to finish this up. Now, I would make a journal page much the same way, building up the layers. Right there, that is my Mod Podge. And you do want to make sure you have a clean brush when you go into your Mod Podge. And if you notice it's a little thinner than Mod Podge, matte medium works beautifully for this too. But matte medium's considerably more expensive than Mod Podge, and I buy the Mod Podge in a half-gallon container, and because I use a lot of it. I use it for glue, I use it to seal, I do all sorts of things. Now, your surface will get a little sticky, but you can use wax over the surface of it, and it will not stick to things. But this protects it from water and other dirt kinds of things. And seeing how I'm using this to make a journal cover or a planner cover, and I carry mine all the time, I want it to be sealed where it doesn't pick up so much dirt. Now I'm just putting on a very thin layer. I let it dry between layers, and I put 3 coats of Mod Podge or sealer on my file folders. You want to put it down thin, and you want to use several layers. So I do a thin coat 3 times on each side. And yes, I finish and seal the inside of my file folder cover as well. Now, please, if you enjoyed this video, do subscribe. I will put a link to the how you make the cover from the file folder down in the description. Please check that out. And I have some journal flips as well. I'll put a link to one of the journal flips, and you can see what kind of journal this is that I'm making. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy your day. Go make some art.